This is an emphatic and overwhelming victory, and it shows that the vast majority of the international community acknowledge that a grave horror occurred, which should never have happened.
A grave humanitarian crime, that is what the UN now calls it. The transatlantic slave trade ended centuries ago, yet its effects remain visible today. It took a UN resolution to acknowledge that much.
But what exactly does Ghana want? Is this about moral awareness or real compensation for centuries of injustice?
The Ghana-led resolution demands the return of stolen cultural artifacts and financial restitution. It emphasizes tangible reparation, not just symbolic regret.
But the big question is, can financial payment heal the wounds of history?
To me, I think it should be money because apology, you can never know. Someone can just say sorry, but when he doesn't mean it.
I think we need to be given money.
Now, UN resolutions carry no legal weight. So how does Ghana plan to make this vision real?
Especially when some nations involved in slavery abstain from the vote. Will we hear the mantra, our ancestors did it, not us, repeat itself?
That argument cannot hold. The international community has held current leaders, current institutions responsible for crimes committed by people belonging to another generation.
So Ghana insists this isn't about ranking atrocities, but about expanding global accountability.
Yes, restorative justice for victims of the transatlantic slave trade. That is our conversation today under the Baobab.
Hi, George.
Yes, we're ready. We can start.
Yes, of course. My name is Mefo Newuh, and it's always a pleasure to have you with us under the Baobab.
Yes, and my name is Okachi. A very warm welcome to you all. Here under the Baobab, we make Africa's complex issues personal and relatable.
And we do so every Friday of the week. We sit down here with policymakers, African leaders, politicians to talk about those stories that really matter.
Yes.
And we are urging our online community not just to be viewers or listeners, but to join the conversation by subscribing to our YouTube channel, DW Africa.
Of course, it is very important to join these conversations because they affect you directly. And today we are diving into Ghana's landmark UN resolution on the transatlantic slave trade, now officially recognized as, the gravest crime against humanity. Now, the UN resolution calls for restitution of looted cultural heritage, reparations, and a rethink of, historical accountability.
Accountability is very important, accepting that you did something, before moving forward to, reparations and so on. And to help us dissect this new chapter in Africa's history, Ghana's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa, joins us under the Baobab today. George, many people are just thinking that, transatlantic slave trade exists only in history books. You remember when we were in primary and secondary schools, we taught about this. Yes. So let's try to break it down now. During the agrarian and industrial revolutions, Europe and North America built their foundations on the backs of African labor. And we are talking about between 12 to 15 million Africans who provided free labor that drove Europe's development at the expense of Africa.
And Europeans operated a brutal system where they captured millions of Africans and shipped them across the ocean to work as slaves in Americas and Europe. Now, the system lasted for centuries, Mimi, and the immense suffering, lives on to today.
Yes, when we talk about labor, it looks like it was just labor that was paid. It was free, forced labor. Europeans, Portuguese, British, and Spanish traders exchanged goods such as guns, clothes, and alcohol with some. The key word here is some African leaders for enslaved people from the West and Central Africa. And Ghana, had to play a very central role as a major coastal hub on West Africa's Gold Coast.
Yes, and what our viewer and listener must appreciate, more than 3 million enslaved people passed through Ghanaian ports, like, the Cape Coast, before ships carried them to the Americas for plantation labor. And now some of these sites now, Mimi, they stand as UNESCO World Heritage Landmarks in Ghana.
Of course, and of course, it could be UNESCO heritage, but when you still look at these sites, they remind you of the horrors of the history. And Ghana has also was involved, but countries like Benin, we have also Nigeria, we have Angola, we have Senegal, we also have Cameroon. They played huge parts. Ghana's history places it at the center, and so does its leadership today. But can a symbolic UN vote turn into real change for descendants of those that were enslaved? That's a very important question, Judge.
Yeah, Mimi, the vote itself was unprecedented. We must appreciate, and getting the support of over 123 countries. That was, a massive support and a backing, for the Ghana-led initiative. And it triggered, reaction across West Africa. And when we were sampling the reactions, because we've been speaking to people and hearing what people are saying, what comes out is, skepticism. And some are wondering, will this really yield any benefit at the end of the day? But some are so, happy about, the UN recognizing this as a, grave crime against humanity.
Which is very, very important, and I had to speak when I was speaking to Minister Ablakwa. One of the questions I asked him was, what concrete outcomes does Ghana expect from this UN resolution, given that the UN is not having any power, to implement, legal reforms? This is what Minister Ablakwa told us.
This has enormous significance. It is going to ensure that over 12.5 million of our ancestors who went through the door of no return, and the perpetrators thought that they will never return, they will never be remembered, there will never be justice. 25th March 2026 will forever go down as the day when the international community said no to impunity, no to forgetting the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, and agreed to create a framework that will ensure that reparatory justice is achieved.
So reparations remain highly contested globally. What practical form does Ghana believe reparations should take at this point in time?
So our resolution looks at reparatory justice within a multiple framework. So it is not just about financial compensation, which is important and must be pursued, but there are also issues related to artifacts. There are thousands of artifacts looted from the continent. We expect all those artifacts to be returned to the continent. We want a comprehensive return of all of these artifacts. Then there are also causes that we expect that reparatory justice will address. We are looking at education, skills training. We are looking at empowerment schemes for the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, their descendants, because they continue to suffer, to live in squalor because of the structural inequalities that slavery and racism creates. Then we are also looking at the current global architecture, which continues to perpetuate discrimination, perpetuate racism, where the color of your skin determines the opportunities that you will get. All of those structural racism that continues onto this day. We want all of that addressed. So that is what this monumental UN declaration will achieve. And I can confirm to you that immediately after the success of this resolution, we have discussed within our broad coalition, we are going to set up a panel of experts to now move to the next stage. Remember that the African Union decided to dedicate a whole decade from 2026 to 2035 for us to achieve our destination.
Does this particular resolution risk deepening global divisions rather than building consensus? What do you think about that, Mr. Minister?
Not at all. When you have an overwhelming number, almost 2/3 of all member states of the United Nations, it is just a few people who have missed a golden opportunity. They have a second opportunity to come on board. And as we put together a framework that addresses the need for reparatory justice, the need to end discrimination, and systemic racism.
So the minister has said it. If
Yes.
you missed out, or you abstained or voted against it, there's still an opportunity to engage in shaping the reparations roadmap through our cooperation and also dialogue.
Yeah, which I find very tricky, Mimi, if you asked me. And just for context, 123 member states voted in favor of the resolution, and 3 voted against it. That is Argentina, Israel, and the United States.
Right.
And the United States and United Kingdom, for that matter, and all the 27 members of the European Union were among the 52 who abstained.
Right.
So I don't know how cooperation will happen in this.
And when you're looking at these countries that abstained or voted against, they're like the countries that were principally involved in slavery and slave trade.
That's true.
But also under the Baobab, we try to some sort of present both sides. We should note that the U.S. said that it is opposing the wrongdoing of the transatlantic slave trade and all forms of slavery. However, it does not recognize a legal right to reparation for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time that they occurred.
Yeah, which is a very pertinent question that will be debated among the legal minds. And France also argued that the resolution seems to establish, a hierarchy among the, atrocities, crimes against humanity. And according to France, this creates serious legal difficulties and runs the risk of creating a competition, among the historical, crimes.
Yes, George, you and I were just having a conversation even before this program. Like, we're just wondering, should people today be held accountable for crimes that were committed so many years ago?
Yeah, and I remember the question you asked me, if it was my grandfather who committed, a particular sin, and many years you're still feeling hurt by, what my grandfather committed. And there is a way I can cooperate in healing the wound. Then there is no need of me to, run away from that. I should confront that.
There's also that aspect of accountability and honesty in saying that, we apologize for this.
Yes.
But we also see a lot that Germany is doing with regards to the genocide that happened in Namibia.
Yes.
Germany should just have said, we were not involved. The current government, the people that are running the country, they were not part of what happened in Namibia. But they've gone as far as not just recognizing what happened in Namibia. They're trying to some sort of, provide reparations for what happened so many years ago in the country. So you wanted to say something?
No, go ahead. I think the minister should tell us more.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I wanted to find out from him how they address fears of ranking atrocities and how they are planning to ensure that this doesn't undermine other, historic tragedies that have taken place. Let's hear what he told us.
We made clear that we are not creating a hierarchy of crimes. What we are doing is simply pointing to the fact that in all of the history of humankind, we have not seen any systemic, well orchestrated, even backed by horrible laws for over 300 years. And the sheer numbers, over 12.5 million people, and those who were tossed in the Atlantic Ocean, over 3 million of them, and the enduring consequences. No crime against humanity has had this far-reaching impact. The deep consequences of the transatlantic slave trade. So we put this in context. It is not about creating a hierarchy or a competition of crimes against humanity.
Can you tell us which are the allies exactly that Ghana is relying on, given that countries like the US, so many European countries are abstaining from this particular resolution?
This is an emphatic and overwhelming victory. And it shows that the vast majority of the international community acknowledge that a grave horror occurred, which should never have happened. And we have committed to a never again. So we have a broad coalition, the majority of member states of the United Nations. And we are saying that we will not close the door at those who missed a golden opportunity to vote for this resolution. And by doing that, particularly for countries who participated in this will have been an opportunity to say we are sorry and we are committed to reparatory justice and putting in place, most importantly, the systems that would address racism and will ensure that this never happens again in our history.
So when you listen to the minister, you can get the impression that they are ready, you know, to make sure that they
carry ahead with the roadmap. Yeah.
Right. So the next question will be, if reparations were to really happen, how would they look like? Experts have floated figures as high as 24 trillion US dollars to account for centuries of unpaid labor and resource extraction, though no consensus exists. We also have the National African American Reparations Commission proposing this particular figure.
Yes, and I'm glad you've mentioned if, you know, reparative justice was to become a reality. The question among many Africans is, or rather many Ghanaians, was like, okay, after the resolution, what next?
Right.
Yes, and the only comparative, you know, scenario we were able to find out was, you know, the case where Germany, you know, made some payments to Holocaust, and also I think there was also the reparative, you know, arrangements of the post-apartheid in South Africa. Those are the only ones we could find around.
But transatlantic slave trade involved like the continent as a whole, and many countries were involved. The impact still there. I see online on social media, Gen Zs are going crazy about this. You know, we always think that Gen Zs are only involved in infotainment and so on. But when this news broke and we saw on social media how they were reacting, I was like, we have a different kind of generation of, you know, young Africans who are really interested in what is happening and what the outcome is going to look like.
Yeah, but what triggered me during the reactions also, Mimi, was that some, you know, expressed like, okay, those things happened long time ago. Issues that are affecting us today are issues governance, which are, you know, being spearheaded or being done by, you know, people in government right now. And I found like that is sort of, you know, detached from, you know, that particular history.
That's what we feel like when we just read history books without going deeper to really know how much Africa has lost after this transatlantic, as a result of transatlantic slave trade. If countries in Europe, the Americas, were also studying the history of transatlantic slave trade, I think that things would have been different. What do you think, George?
Definitely. And of course, because this is under the baobab, such questions, we normally throw them to our community. And for that reason, our correspondents, Olisa Chukwuma in Nigeria and Frank Higa in Uganda, spoke to some, you know, ordinary Africans on what they think about Ghana's reparations push.
Things like slavery should not really be used. What has happened then should not affect us now, because people then are not really people in power now.
People still feel segregated as a result of being black, and it's not something that you can forget. It's going to be something that always runs through the mind of a black man anytime he enters a foreign society. Am I going to be discriminated because of my color?
It's just like a mark, like a scan that cannot be removed. So it cannot be forgotten. It's still going to affect, for some part of Africans, some part of Africa, that the slavery still affects you today. And there's hindered several opportunities for some Africans in some underdeveloped countries.
Giving us money doesn't mean it's going to heal the generations of black people that have been hurt.
I think we need to be given money. So just a mere sorry cannot work now, because for them, their countries are stable. For them, they used our wealth to make themselves richer, and that is why they even have the audacity to stand and tell us that, you know what, we can give you cash or an apology.
To me, I think it should be money, because apology, you can never know. Someone can just say sorry, but when he doesn't mean it. So I think money for now. I would take money. They still find it as a favor for you to go and work there. I mean, some of them actually feel it is even okay for you to go and work for free.
We should fight for ourselves. Though those people think we are still slaves, because when we are in their country, you see the way sometimes they behave.
That's right. I would agree with, the diverse views. Someone is saying that let's move forward. You know, the past is the past. And then someone is saying that when you're in the country, you can see how they behave. But I would say something, George, that this happened so many years ago. And today we are talking about reparations. We didn't even know we were going to get here. But I want to look at the millions of people that were moved from Africa into Europe.
Yes.
Illegally forced to move for hard labor, to work in industries, to work and build Europe and the Americas. If that was not the case, don't you think Africa would be a better place today for Africans?
Definitely. You could argue that it could have been, a better place because we would have the manpower, the human resource to propel the development aspiration that the continent has. There was a conference in Ghana that was in 2023, and there was, proposed, reparation fund to coordinate compensation because financial compensation is central to reparation.
Right.
Yeah. So there was no something legally binding to help this materialize.
And people are hoping that if these funds are dished out or disbursed, they could help maybe build Africa so that it could be a better place.
But the problem is there is no framework.
There's no framework, of course, but there are hopes that it could potentially, come to fruition.
Yes.
Public opinion also remains very divided. There was a 2021 Pew survey that found only about 3 in 10 U.S. adults said descendants of enslaved people in the U.S. should receive repayment, in some form, such as land or money. So it's safe to say that Americans view the prospect of reparations mostly very, very negative. They don't see like something that should even happen.
Yeah, and activists also have argued that meaningful reparative justice must go beyond, money and towards development funding, as you've, spoken about, and restitution of stolen resources, which we've seen a number of activists, fronting for that, and dismantling the systemic inequalities that slavery, created.
Still, many governments claim that they shouldn't bear guilt for acts committed centuries ago. And so I wanted to find out from the minister, on what moral or legal premise does Ghana actually argue that responsibility extends across generations? Many African leaders also were involved.
Yes.
Europeans and the Americas were involved. Let's find out from the minister.
That argument cannot hold. The international community has held current leaders, current institutions responsible for crimes committed by people belonging to another generation. And we all know what has happened to reparative justice when it comes to the Holocaust. We condemn the Holocaust, but we know what has happened and how people who were not alive, who were not the perpetrators, have been made to pay compensation and to carry out reparatory justice and to commit to anti-Semitism, and that never again should this happen. So we have an international architecture that we can follow. Why is it that when it comes to people of African descent, then suddenly the rules change? Then suddenly we have different jurisprudence. The consequences of the transatlantic slave trade didn't end with the abolishment of the transatlantic slave trade.
But Mr. Minister, there are also arguments that some African leaders, African traditional rulers, were involved in this transatlantic slave trade. How does Ghana address this part of the history?
So this argument is an old trick. Let's divide them. Let's make them feel guilty. So it is those African traditional leaders who asked the United States to promulgate laws which made human beings commodities, that once you are black, you are property. You are not human. The Western countries, from Britain to France, it was these African leaders who lobbied them, led the charge and asked them to create the structures, the laws, the systems for the discrimination and degradation of human lives. And it is these people who asked that the ships be brought, and they determine the prices and all of that. I mean, you see how ridiculous and preposterous these claims are. It is an old trick. And I am glad that this time that trick didn't work. We are wiser. They have failed. They are the perpetrators. They are the masterminds. They cannot find equals. They cannot find collaborators. Look, what happened? People must take responsibility and stop attempting to share the blame.
Well, that's quite interesting and heated there.
Yes.
So when we want to go, soft under the baobab, what do we do, Judge?
Normally under the baobab as a way to cool off, intense issues and sensitive issues like, reparative justice. And we do that through our rapid fire question segment where we get to know Minister Samuel when he is not pushing for reparative justice.
Right. What food from your childhood instantly takes you back home? Especially when you are not in Ghana, like right now.
Banku and okra soup.
So what is that first music album that you save up for?
Well, I would say that Obrafo, the hip life legend, I don't know if you know him, but growing up, he was such a sensation. And he's still my very good friend.
And when you're not talking about politics, what are you doing during your leisure time?
I love to hang out with my kids. I like to enjoy their company and their conversations. It's amazing what you can learn from children, I must tell you.
What is the specific nickname that people used to call you when you were a little child?
They still call me the son of man.
Interesting. And that special name that you get to call your wife?
Princess. She remains my princess.
What is that simple family tradition that you always enjoy when you're at home?
Coming together and sharing a meal. And we love to drive together as well. Take on long drives to the constituency.
And the final question, in the next 1 year, Ghana will be, can you complete that sentence?
70 years old, and we will also be chairing the African Union. So it's going to be a great year in 2027. A lot to look out for.
70 years old. That's amazing. Banku.
Yeah.
Have you ever eaten banku?
Yeah, I've taken banku, of course, and I love it so much.
In Germany or in Ghana?
Yeah.
That's good.
Now, after Ghana's exemplary push, critics have come out guns blazing, Mimi, and they say Ghana must first uphold its, domestic human rights record before they can, claim to play a leadership role.
Yeah, I know that we had to bring this under the baobab, to also talk about you don't get to have the foreign minister every day. Yes. And they are calling for reparations. Ghana, of course, is calling for reparations abroad. But we also don't want it to look like it's just Ghana, because this is an African thing. Calling for reparations abroad while facing scrutiny. So Ghana is not void of scrutiny and back at home can sound some sort of contradictory. But Ghana says that both domestic reforms and international justice can advance together.
Yeah, and so does moral authority require perfection? That is always the question we want to advance. Or is leading on historic justice like Ghana currently does a separate imperative?
Let's hear what the minister told us.
Again, Ghana has been a strong believer in human rights. We remain a country where the rights of all our citizens and those who visit our country, their rights are respected and guaranteed. So I say to you clearly that Ghana's human rights credentials remain intact. We will go to every extent to preserve and protect the rights of all our citizens. I would really, without any equivocation, want to declare those criticisms absolutely unfounded.
I just also wanted to find out from you, Mr. Minister, to what extent should the current administration in Ghana take credit for this particular resolution?
It's a Ghana-led initiative. We are not interested in taking credit because this could not have been achieved by one government. Even if it was just an African Union agenda, we would not have been able to succeed without CARICOM, without CELAC, without the GCC, without the Asian countries, and all of those, even within Europe. So we want to make this an international victory, a victory of all people of good conscience in the world who want to confront systemic racism that remains unto this day. So we are not petty to want to take credit. This is about a global movement for reparative justice. And we want everybody to feel a part of this success, a part of this victory. It is a collective victory. And we are not interested in being small-minded about it.
So Ghana's UN resolution represents, George, more than a symbolic victory. It actually opens doors a particular door, rather. The question now is whether the international community will work through it. For descendants of enslaved Africans, this moment carries a lot of weight. It says their history matters, their pain deserves an acknowledgement, and their future demands investment. Whether that translates into returned artifacts, financial compensation, or development partnerships, that remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, Ghana has forced that conversation, has started that conversation, George.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can't agree more. And that conversation must include Africa's own accountability. Restorative justice isn't just about Europe, what Europe owes Africa. It's about what African leaders owe to their people. Good governance, for instance, transparency and respect for human rights aren't separate from this discussion.
If you care about honest conversations like these ones, uncomfortable, of course, but very necessary, this is where you need to belong. It's under the baobab.
Definitely.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, DW Africa, and you can also follow us on Spotify and
Apple Podcasts as we continue to slow down, ask bigger questions, and put power under the microscope. My name is George Okachi. Until next time.
And I am Mefo. Newuh. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.